Hi everyone and welcome back to the garden. More overwintering fun, but at least today the sun is shining and the sky is currently blue. Yes, it's a bit windy, it's fresh, but that's all part of being in the garden in November. So if you watch the early part of this video, you'll have seen me chop down that Gunner Manicata, those absolutely humongous leaves, and use them to protect the crown. I then moved on to digging up some Bromeliads, chopping back some cannas, and lifting one of my Ensete plants. So last night I chopped back the rest of the Ensete leaves, so they're ready to dig up later today. The cannas, although I've chopped them down, the reality is the bits that's in the ground, the rhizome and those stems, will be able to take a bit of cold. So I'm not in a rush to dig them up this weekend. That can wait till I've got more time, hopefully in a couple of weeks, a few weeks time. But today I want to move on to my next priority, which is digging up more of the big leaf plants. Plants like the Ensete that won't really like a frost, the Alocasia, Colocasia, and a few of the houseplants that got dotted throughout the garden. So let's get looking into those now. The first section we're going to look at then, I'm just trying to keep this out of the way, I'm not trying to hide behind it. Down here we've got an Ensete, that'll be going inside as a houseplant. Similar to the larger ones, but I might have to give it a little bit more water just to keep it ticking over through the winter months. And next to it we've got some big glossy leaves, they're both Alocasia. And this one here, that's my favourite Alocasia to grow here in the garden. It's Alocasia brisbanensis, which is fantastic. It grows well even in our summers, or excuse for summers this year. It's got amazing glossy leaves and it's really easy to overwinter. And basically all I do, dig it up, pot it up and keep it slightly dry, but I don't let it completely dry out, and it seems to tick over okay. Sure, the old leaves don't really like being inside, they might get a bit of yellowing, but it stays alive, it keeps growing, and it's good to go in the garden again next year. And the other thing about this is, it puts out pups as well. So Alocasias, I find are a very good plant to multiply, to get spares of, and others that you can use to dot around the garden. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this section apart, dig up all these plants, using a spade, a trowel carefully, and then also I'll show you a couple of houseplants I've got dotted down the side. So just under there, you might be able to see it now, there's a Bromeliad and a spider plant. I'll probably dig those up too and get them ready to take inside. Now I dug the plants up then and made a proper old mess. I thought I'd show you a few of them and why I grow them here in the tropical garden, along with a few tips to help you keep them going over winter. Starting off then with this absolute monster, which is Alocasia brisbanensis. It's absolutely fantastic plant. Just look at the size of those leaves. I've had it for a few years and it sizes up well pretty much every year. Even in a cool summer like this, it's put out loads of new leaves and they've got amazing sort of glossy sheen to them. It's absolutely fantastic and it's a great plant to go alongside your bananas, cannas, pretty much anything else with big leaves really. Also, it's very tolerant of being dug up, which obviously at the minute it does look quite cruel, and I will chop off some of those lower leaves to balance out the roots that have been damaged. But as long as you keep the base intact, it seems to handle it really well and it grows nicely, just ticks over in the winter, and then when you put it outside again next May, June, it sets off again. So it really is a very tolerant plant of both this sort of mistreatment and our cooler summers. It's got an amazing sort of pattern, marbling effect, I don't know if you can see there in the stems, but to me it's all about those leaves. And like I said, it does handle just being dug up like this, potted up over winter, kept not entirely dry, but I like to keep it on the drier side. Yes, some of these lower leaves might turn a bit yellow, but ultimately the plant will survive and it'll be ready to go out in the garden next summer. And if you look into there, you can probably see some new bulbs coming through. those actually form their own divisions, so you can make more plants. So it's definitely a good plant to have one of, so in the future years you get more to spread it around your garden. On the point of offsets, here's a small one, which obviously isn't that well rooted, and this one was actually found growing next to the mother plant, which is what they tend to do. I've dug it up separately, came away quite nicely, but you can see it's still got roots of its own. So that will just go into a small pot over winter. Again, I'll keep as a house plant, and that should hopefully size up nicely and be another part of the tropical bedding in the garden here next year. Next up then, we've got another big leaf beauty, and it's this Alocasia odora. I actually bought this from Farmer Gracie a few years ago as a dry bulb, and it's grown really well. But generally speaking, I recommend buying Alocasia as a plant because they're hard to actually start off. You need a fair bit of heat and a fair bit of moisture, I found, to actually get them going. But this one, it's done really well, and again, I'll keep as a house plant over winter. And here's a fun little fact, not really fun, but Alocasias, generally the leaves point upwards like that. Colocasias, the leaves hang down and they point down. So there's a little way of identifying the different ones. As to which varieties are which, I've got absolutely no idea. I just choose the ones that I like, and over the years I find the ones that grow well for me. So this Alocasia, it's done really well there. It started off as quite a small plant this summer, but it's definitely sort of tripled in size this year. And as you can see at the base there's another plant. With cannas, I don't generally recommend dividing them at this time of year. I tend to leave them as a big clump now and then split them up in spring, because that way you get more heat to actually get them growing once you split them up. You've got less chance of small plants rotting away over winter. But with this Alocasia, because it's going to be kept as a house plant over winter, I will actually split this up so I get 2 plants for next year. And that is nice and easy. Again, it might seem really brutal, but you just have to get right in there, get your hands in there, and basically split it away from the bulb. So it's actually harder than it looks, but I'm trying to do it really carefully. And as you can see, it does come away eventually. Try to get as much root on it as possible, and you end up with another plant there. So that's not as bad as it might look. I'll chop off the 2 lower leaves, I'll pot that up, keep it inside somewhere warm, nice bit of water, and that'll grow just fine. Then I've got this plant for next year and another to put somewhere else in the garden. Next up then, we've got that flash of red that you might have seen shining out of the garden. This is a Bromeliad, one that I actually got from Wilco's. I think it was about £4. And as you can see, that flower is still shining bright, still a beautiful red colour, even about 4 months later. So it's really done fantastic. Yes, I've used it as bedding, but I'm not just going to chuck it away and compost it. It's far too nice for that. And as you can see, it's actually tolerated even a light frost. It had a bit of overhead cover, but it's done alright outside. So I think it deserves a place in the bathroom where it can bring this bright red colour for months to come, hopefully anyway. As you can see, it's not rooted out much, but Bromeliads, they actually sort of generally grow in the trees in the wild, places where there isn't a lot of soil, so I wasn't expecting it to root very deeply. But that being said, really convenient just to pop this in a pot and keep it growing happily inside. Like I said, it's a beautiful splash of colour, and for me, there's nothing more tropical and sort of unobtainable to grow in a UK garden than a Bromeliad. When you see the gardens in South America absolutely packed full of them, they look absolutely incredible, mind-blowing. Whereas here, it's something you don't see every day. So it's a house plant, but one that can definitely come outside for a summer holiday in the garden. I've actually just noticed in the soil another Alocasia brisbanensis, a tiny little baby one, but there you can see the bulb that it's growing from and that little root. So although it's an absolute baby, I will be potting this one up and growing it as a houseplant over winter. Because even a plant this size, if you keep it inside where it's warm, bright, give it plenty of water, something like this will size up pretty quickly. So with all the plants you've seen so far, I chopped the leaves back to try to balance out the roots that I've lost. Whereas this plant here, the Ensete, I've not chopped the leaves back to ease that transition. I've chopped it back so it doesn't take up as much space. Because the rest of them, they do look nice, they're aesthetic houseplants. A lot of people do grow Alocasia just as a houseplant. I obviously include them as bedding in the garden. Whereas this Ensete, I'm only growing this inside because I have to, because it won't survive outside. It doesn't look especially pretty right now, but the problem is, one this size is too small to dry store. There just aren't the reserves in that pseudo stem. If you can get your hand around it, it's probably too small to dry store. So this one, I'll basically be taking a lot of that compost off, potting it in a small pot, packing it in with a lot of the others at the end of the house there. I don't know why I looked over because you can't see where I'm looking. But basically, just dry store it in a pot, giving it a bit of water maybe every month or so to stop it completely drying out. And hopefully it'll make it through winter. But small ones like this are a bit of a gamble. That being said, I've got quite a few with them. That's where I think you need to do it. Get a few, and if you lose 1 or 2, it's not the end of the world. The last plant you saw me dig up is this here, a spider plant. So what I did at the end of last summer, I had a couple of spider plants, and as you know, they send out loads of babies. And what I did, I put them all into pots so I could grow a load of bedding for this summer. They've done really well, they're brightening up those dark, shady spaces, and I think they're a fantastic addition to any tropical garden. Like I said earlier in the year, they're a plant that you're well used to seeing inside, but to see them outside, they're certainly something a bit different. And they do actually have a level of hardiness. They're not guaranteed hardy, but if you live somewhere sheltered, somewhere mild, and we do get a milder winter, they might even survive outside. But this one was just in the way of those other plants. I needed to dig it up, so I might as well just put it in a small pot, keep it inside for winter, and then I'll bring it outside next summer. But I think they're a fantastically underused plant. I know Will Giles, the late Will Giles, he had them in his garden, and I think they go fantastically with all these other tropical plants. So you're now joining me a few hours later in the middle of absolute garden carnage. There's plants dug up everywhere. I've got several stacks of leaves that will be going back into the soil. I was talking about that in a video coming very soon. There's plants literally lined up, different groups of plants, but I've tried to put it together so hopefully I can provide a lot of help and a lot of value for you. So we'll go through them in a little bit. I'll show you the different areas of plants and what I do with them through winter. But I think it's easy at this time of year to be disheartened by having to bring all these plants in, to be chopping plants back, and for your garden to look so much more empty. I mean, here, just looking around, the garden actually looks about 3 times the size that it did last week. So there's definitely pros, but unfortunately, this is a necessary part of growing these plants. And I think you just need to look on the positive side. With tropical gardening, with digging these plants up, you can move things around next year. So it gives you that creativity, that freedom, different possibilities. You can have different plants in different areas. If something hasn't worked quite as well as you wanted this year, or hasn't grown quite as well, then you can easily dig it up and move it somewhere different. You can completely change your colour scheme around, your groupings of different plants. So really, you just need to see it as one of those things you have to do to be able to grow these plants, and it's a step towards an even bigger and better garden next year. So without rambling on too much longer, I'll show you the different groups of plants before it gets any darker. Sorry this video seems a bit disjointed. I did want to do the second part of it today, but we've had a day of absolute chaos in terms of weather. It's been raining every other hour. I've been getting mud absolutely everywhere. It's not easy to operate a camera with muddy hands, and typically the rainbow happened when I had muddy hands. A sparrowhawk darted across the garden, sat on the fence when I had muddy hands. I really wanted to capture those, get them in this video, but it is what it is. If you don't have a team, if it's just you and yourself, you have to do what you can do. But there are a couple of plants that I won't be mentioning, which are the plants that are left outside. Not all the hardy plants or the plants that naturally die down for winter. I'm not worried about the cannas, they can stay outside for a good few weeks yet. The same with the salvias, the dahlias, those, they're not a concern, and a light frost, it'll wipe out that top growth, but the actual plant itself will be fine. But the plants I'm talking about are the ricinus and the coleus. Now, neither of those are hardy, and a frost will zap them. But the reality is, for me personally, it's not worth keeping them over winter. Because those ricinus, they grow so fast, they get so leggy. If you try to overwinter them in a polytunnel, for a start, you might not have the height to overwinter them. And secondly, it's probably just not worth it. Because you end up with a really leggy plant, even if it does survive being dug up, it won't look especially attractive next year. You might as well just grow new ones from seed next spring. They'll grow so quickly, you can have 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10-foot plants next year. And when it comes to coleus, I used to keep cuttings. At this time of year, I'd chop them back, get a load of cuttings, make a load of plants, but I just found that they just took so much space to overwinter. So if you've got the space, if you've got the resources, then you can certainly overwinter coleus. You can dig up the main plant, chop it back, get loads of cuttings, and it'll set you up nicely for next summer. But personally, I don't have that much room inside where I can keep plants with adequate heat, with adequate light, so I try to prioritise the ones I want to keep from year to year. So here we are then, I wasn't lying about garden carnage, there's stuff everywhere. So let's go through it quickly. Colocasia esculenta. I touched on these in that video I did last week, and as you can see, they get to be pretty big plants. Even in a less than optimal position, in a poor summer, they still get big. So that's the main reason that I choose to dry store them. As you can see, there's a massive difference in terms of how much space they take up. But what I might do this year is keep some as houseplants. When I say houseplants, they're probably not the most aesthetic plant to have in your living room, but I'll be chucking them in that end room that I use as a greenhouse and just basically keeping one leaf on them at a time, just keeping them ticking over. But those ones there, that is really the easiest way to store them. As long as they're a half decent size, keep them dry, and it's a nice easy way of getting them through from year to year. There's my little robin friend. Shooting off. So, here we go, the houseplants. they've got there, that's a Begonia luxurians, which is a fantastic plant, one that I bought as a plug earlier in summer, so they do grow really quickly. And they've got those amazing leaves that actually look a bit like a chef flower. So they're definitely a very desirable plant, and they're also a plant that is, well, it's tender, so you have to bring them inside. Now, one thing I will address, that growing point does look a bit bent. It was quite windy when I dug it up, and I think it hit the plant above it. I'm not sure if it's completely snapped or not, or whether it's just a reaction to me actually digging it up. So what I'll probably do, take it inside, obviously. I'm going to put it somewhere warm, give it plenty of water, and hopefully coax it back into life. But worst case, I might have to chop that bit back. It's not the end of the world, because it means I'll get a multi-trunked or multi-stem plant next year with even more leaves. So just going through again, these are the plants I'm bringing in as houseplants. When I say houseplants, I basically mean plants you have to keep on growing them actively. You can't dry store these, or at least you can't dry store them very well, but take a serious amount of heat to actually get going again. So these Alocasias, I'm keeping them exactly as they are, and all I've done, just literally choose a pot that's only about big enough to fit those roots in, put some fresh compost in there, chop some of the leaves back, because like I said, you need to chop some of the leaves to offset the amount of roots that you're taking off, and basically that is how I keep it. But as you can see, they're now getting to be quite big plants, so I'll certainly be having to pack them in that room just to be able to keep them. And that's one of the reasons why plants like this here, Colocasia Pink China, they're such a great garden plant for any tropical garden, because you get the same kind of look of a plant like this, but without all the wintering headaches, the overwintering ones. So that's the plants I'm bringing inside here over winter. I will be sorting out those Colocasia in the same sort of style, popping those in pots, and those I'll just be sitting somewhere on a bit of newspaper so they can dry out completely. But all these plants, the big leaf plants, they like moist soil, rich soil, anywhere they can grow these absolutely massive leaves. There are plants on the sunnier end of the garden that I also overwinter, and these are here. So again, it's a complete mess at the minute, but we've got some cacti. It's really inexpensive to buy some small cacti, and for me it's a great way of adding a touch of exotic to any kind of dry sunny garden. They cost literally a couple of £2 each, and basically I think once you open your mind up to what is a bedding plant, you can really experiment, have fun, and put houseplants outside for summer. It really adds a bit of something to your garden. The plants I've got around it, Aeoniums, quite a big one there. You might see just how little the actual, well, how small the root ball is, but they come up really easy like that. And Aeoniums, they grow so easily from a cutting anyway, I don't really think they need much of a root to survive. Even monsters like these here, absolutely beautiful. You can probably see there just how big that is, maybe around 40 centimetres across, and it's got a root ball like that. These two, Aeonium hirens, they're quite tricky to overwinter because of just how tall and how leggy they are. They always end up flopping over, so I have to prop them up in the pot. But the one thing with Aeoniums that you might notice when you bring them inside, because they've come from an environment with adequate moisture, you bring them inside with drier air, less water, they will start to lose some of these lower leaves. But that's not the end of the world. They will sort of drop off. As long as you keep the plant alive, ticking over, it'll be ready to grow again next year. So heading round again, you can't not notice the stack of Ensetes. So there's loads of them. I think it's only at this time of year when you realise just how much everything's grown and how many you actually have. So the ones you see at this side here, these are the absolute monsters. The big ones, the ones that I've had from the old house. And as you can see, even though it's not been the best year for them, they've been growing in shady spots, they've still got to a pretty decent size. You can see on that one there, that's the corm at the base. It's basically like a big root vegetable. The plant grows from that. So all I need to do with those is basically, well, firstly dry them out, which I mentioned in the last video. Using a dehumidifier is definitely my top tip for that. But I'm basically going to tip them upside down and then put them in a pot that's just about big enough for the roots. Literally, you only want a pot that just fits that base, just enough to hold it upright, and then I essentially dry store them. They will try to grow a little bit over the next couple of months, but you slow that down by keeping them on the dry side. And then as February, March comes around, maybe March time, you can start to give them a little bit more water, just to give them a kickstart into growth. And I think this way you get bigger plants for next year, whereas dry storing, they definitely shrink a fair bit. Walking around then, you'll see my army of smaller Ensetes, and this is when they're a bit tricky, because as you can see from the size of the pseudo stems, there's not a huge amount there to actually store energy and to actually make it through. So these are the size that you typically need to grow as a houseplant. Now, you might be wondering, what's the difference between growing these as a houseplant versus having those in your house in a pot? But what I tend to do with these is just be a little bit more wary of how much water they get. So what I'll do, I'll put them in a pot, something like that size there, so it's just a bit bigger. They've got a fair bit of soil there, and I have to give them, at this size, a little bit more water, because they won't keep going all the way through winter completely dry. But equally, you just need to be watching them and make sure they don't go rot, well, they don't rot or they don't go mushy. It's always a good idea, if you're going to have small ones, to get a few, put a few of them in your display, because they're not always guaranteed to make it through winter. But once they get to this sort of size, generally speaking, you're all right. The problem comes when we have a really long winter like this year, well, should I say earlier this year, when it was actually June before they could go outside properly. That makes things tricky. But anyway, I'll take you on a bit of a walk round so you can see just how much space we've got now. So first things first, you'll notice those gunnerer, now they're packed away. The little wigwam, or massive wigwam should I say, all this space here. So I'm definitely going to have more room in winter to get the rest of things tidied up and to get some mulch added to the soil. Here, we've got the Xantadecia. They're the Hercules or White Giant, one of them's got spots on it, but either way an amazing plant, and one that's actually attempting to flower again now. So these, they are relatively hardy, but with these being such decent plants now, I don't want them to die back. So I will dig up one of these, put it in the polytunnel, just keep it there as an insurance policy. Complete mess there. I'm not too worried about all the holes in the ground at the minute, because I will be filling those in over the next few weeks. Heading through here then, you'll see some more of the cannas. Chop those down, ready to be dug up. Got some smaller Xantadecias. They won't like a frost, but again, I'll dig them up soon. As soon as I've got the polytunnel up, they can go in there. Moving across, you've got a salvia still doing its thing. Up here, the ricinus. The ones that are in the way, I have chopped back, but some of them that were standing by themselves, I've left just because I think they look cool with a frost on them. And also, you know, it gives a bit of structure to the space for at least the next few weeks. So here you can see absolute carnage. That's where my vegetables were growing. I've chopped those all back. Another canna there that needs to come inside. In this area here, around the bamboo, I will be mulching the whole area to give those bamboos the best start for next year. A lot of the plants that were around here were pretty much fill-in plants to really sort of give the area a bit of volume, create that jungle look until the bamboo size up. So it's definitely worked this year. In here, something a little bit interesting. Variegated tetrapanax. Obviously the whole plant isn't like that, unfortunately. If it was, I'd probably be a millionaire, could retire by now. But heading around here, you can see that this bed is basically empty now. Pretty much everything's out. I'll probably be taking the eucomis out and a few of the other remaining bits and pieces. And this area is definitely going to see some planting changes this winter. Just having a quick look at the Mediterranean style bed. I've taken my little cacti out now. And all that's left are the hardy agaves. So you've got a vatifolia there, surrounded by a few weeds. Montana. The holes left by the Aeoniums there. Some more weeds, another Montana, and some more Montanas. So what I'll probably do with these is basically wait until the Hylotelephiums or sedums are finished flowering. I'll chop those back, and that definitely gives the Montanas a bit of airflow around them. And at that point, I'll probably put an overhead cover, some sort of polycarbonate or perspex cover over them, just to keep that winter wet out. But as you can see now, we're heading to a point where pretty much everything left in the garden is structural, bold and tough. The yucca, the Trachyarpus palm, the jubea and the bamboos. You don't really see these in the summer, you see everything as one big picture, but at this time of year it makes you realise just how the puzzle comes together and how so many different plants from all around the world, each with their own overwintering conditions, they all combine to create a garden that certainly feels like you're in the tropics. So thanks a lot for watching this video. I know it's been a bit of a long one, but hopefully you picked up some information on how to overwinter these amazing plants. As always, if there's anything you want to know, drop me a comment below, but I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.